Welcome to Transformative Principal, where I help you stop putting out fires and start leading. I am your host, Jethro Jones. You can follow me on Twitter at Jethro Jones. Okay, Eric, I must say it is difficult to go so long without talking to you.
How long has it been?
It's been a month since we last talked.
Yeah, it does feel like it's a long time.
Yeah. So I want to check in on how things are going with what we talked about before. Just a refresher. We talked about one, having a canned response in your email to send to people when they're upset, and two, scheduling to send out the email when somebody's upset. And we talked about pre-planning how you're going to exit the school and creating different experiences around things that were a bad experience. So I just want to check in about those things and then hear how they're going, or if they're no longer relevant and you've like totally solved them.
Yeah, man, a month is a long time to go without us talking. That's why it feels like so long. That's probably normal for some people, like to go a month, but yeah, the first couple of things that we talked about in our last coaching session with the canned responses and scheduling emails has been working so well. I've actually had a couple opportunities to share that with some teachers that that feeling teachers get like when they get in an email war with a parent and they're like, oh shoot, I better BCC or forward the chain to the principal just in case the parent comes in or calls them. And so I've had that happen with a few staff, and I've tried to share that same strategy with them. It's just heartbreaking, like when you see a teacher, one was last week, get an email from a parent and respond right away, which never wins. You never win an email war. And then it kept going, and I quit reading, but like the last timestamp was like 8:39 p.m. I was like, man, this poor teacher's literally losing sleep and not doing other things, enjoying family time or time away from school because they just kept going back and forth with this parent through email. So that's been working well, and I've been putting it to good use.
Good.
Yeah. I have not had. I need to talk to him just to see, because it seems like an unusual conversation when we talked about like a pre-planned exit, like to have an agreement with your superintendent, like, hey, someday when I leave, this is how it'll be, and you got to promise me a chance to communicate it, respectfully and professionally. I haven't had a chance to do that yet. I haven't had an admin meeting yet, but I'm going to tomorrow, and I'm going to see how that goes. He'll probably laugh and be like, "What? Why would you feel the need to talk to me?" So I'll need to give him some background on that. Why
Yeah.
you felt like it was important.
Well, and I think this is something that maybe this isn't really an issue. It was just what people said was an issue, right? And so we have to be open to that idea as well, that maybe people are saying they're afraid of that, when in reality they're not afraid of it, but they don't know how else to express what's going on. So, it's been a month. You haven't taken any action on this thing. Maybe it's not actually that important. Maybe it is. That's for you to decide and understand. But I want to make sure that we're okay and open to the idea that maybe it's not necessary. Maybe it's not something that we need to spend any time or energy on, but it felt in the moment like it was. And maybe time has healed those wounds, and that doesn't need to exist. I don't know. What do you think?
I would say that's definitely true. And having a month of time and distance from it, we talked about creating positive experiences with like the all call to a staff meeting. I haven't heard or seen, it hasn't come up at all with any staff in the last month, and I think they've moved past that. And I was probably just a little taken aback by it. Like, really, that's a like a wound they have. And so I haven't had to do that, and I feel like that's definitely something that almost halfway through a school year they they won't feel like is an issue. I am going to talk to my superintendent though about the pre-plan exit though, just because I want to
Yeah.
see the reaction.
Yeah. And that's good. And I can appreciate that because I think there's a recognition there that um that that your superintendent may say, "Oh, that's interesting that they feel that way," and maybe do some self-reflection himself and say, maybe I can think about how I do this. Like if I send an email to all the staff and this is what I've said the last 4 times, that's what they're going to be expecting. And that I think that'll be a fun conversation. You'll have to text me and tell me how that one goes because I'm curious about that.
Yeah.
So what's on your mind today?
This probably isn't a new thing, but it seemed new to me. We hear all the time as principals, and we should do this without being told. You got to be the instructional leader, be in classrooms, be involved in curriculum, assessments, student learning, model lifelong learning. But I was talking to somebody I interviewed for the podcast last week that kind of flipped that on its head. And Eric Branister asked me, he said, "Hey, are you an instructional leader or are you a people leader?" And I've been thinking a lot about that since our conversation last week. There's so many things I've tried to focus on, the stuff, the things that need to change, the tangible stuff. And when we were talking about recruiting and mostly retaining quality staff, it almost seemed too good to be true and too simple. But he's like, but you're always going to have to take care of those things and that stuff. But really, a good leader that wants to keep good staff, you should be taking care of people first. And so I've never heard that term, like be a people leader over an instructional leader as a building administrator, but it's made me kind of rethink, like, what is my priority? Am I running down people saying, "Hey, get this done, do this, cross this off your list, help me fix this," or something as simple as, "Doing all right? How are things going? What can I take off your plate today?" So I wanted to see if you had some ideas for me how to be more of a people leader instead of just a instructional leader or a leader of things.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad that you asked because you'll notice in my book, How to Be a Transformative Principal, there is a whole section of that book that does not exist. And I only talk about it a little bit because and I think that Eric's phrase of, "Are you a people leader?" is a better way to ask it than what I said, which is basically that being an instructional leader is not really that important if you don't do all the other stuff well. Yeah. So it's all well and good to be an instructional leader, but if nobody likes you and you don't like anybody, it doesn't even matter, right?
And everybody quits and everybody's new. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think Eric is spot on about that. And we have to recognize that we need to be people leaders first. And the way that I talk about that the most is I say we have to recognize that every single person that we're working with has value as an individual first and foremost, and that is the most important. The way that I phrase that, because of who I am, is in a spiritual capacity. I believe that every person is a child of God. Therefore, they are wonderful and amazing and unique and powerful. Not everybody agrees with that, and that's fine. But for me, that's how I phrase that, and that's what helps me see the value that people have inherently. For anybody else who doesn't believe that, you can recognize that people have worth just by virtue of being a human being. Therefore, you can treat them with respect and compassion from the beginning. So in all the things that we do, we've really got to focus on the individual and what's working or not working for that individual. My big rally against data is that data is talking about groups of people and never focused on the individual person. And so if 97% of your students are at grade level or have mastery in a certain thing, 3% of your students are 100% not there. And those 3% have a very different experience than everybody else. And so that would be the first thing that I would say is, if you want to be a people leader, you need to focus on the individual. You can't ignore the individual for the sake of data, because that that ignores who that individual person is. So that's the big viewpoint that I take. Let's talk about some specific things that you think you need to improve on in being a people leader, because you and I both know you already do a lot of things really well. So what are some areas where you feel like you could use some refinement or improvement?
Well, my conversation with Eric made me think about, when I'm talking to a staff member, how much of that is focused on them as a person and how much of it is other stuff. Because rarely do I make it intentional to go like seek someone out and kind of just check in with them or check up on them. Usually it's like, well, we schedule meetings with people that we got stuff to do, or we need to make decisions, or we need to finish something. So I wondered if that was something that would help me, is, like with teachers, making it a concerted effort to stop by like on their planning time, just to check in with them, see how they're doing. Would that be a way?
Yeah, like, are you still doing your morning laps?
Yes.
And is that an opportunity for you to focus on the individual?
Yeah. Yep. I get up there, like teachers that I can check in with are ones that have planning that first period. The other ones I usually don't, because they'll have kids coming in by then. So I was thinking like during planning would be a time I could, instead of just taking a morning lap, schedule them like throughout the week. Hey, get up there at mid-morning, get up there after lunch, because there's definitely some that I don't see and check in with as much.
So this is an important evolution, I believe. So you've been doing these morning check-ins, you're observing in classrooms, you're going and seeing what's going on in the classroom with students there, and you're feeling that you are not as connected to the individual teachers as you would want to be. Is that a fair summary?
Yes.
Okay, so now you're saying, man, it's nice for me to go see their classrooms with kids in there, but I'm not spending any time building rapport, getting to know them better, or understanding them as individuals. So what can I do now better to meet their needs? And so you're recognizing that one thing you could do is schedule your check-ins during their planning period so that there's less instructional observations and more in-person individual observations. Does that sound right?
Yeah, like shifting the focus from being visible and being around to actually talking to them, interacting, building a relationship.
Yeah. So that's powerful, right? So you're going from being visible to being impactful. Why do you feel like you need to make this shift yourself personally right now?
Well, part of it was my conversation with Eric and just kind of reframing my whole thinking of like, where is my focus and what is my priority? And it should be more on people, but also just a short interaction I had where it was the last period of the day, last day of the week, last week. I see a teacher and they're like, hey, Eric, how was your week? And it made me, they weren't being rude or like pointing this out, but in my mind, I'm like, oh my goodness, I didn't talk to them all week.
Yeah.
Like they probably didn't even know if I was, around or I was okay or something happened. And I'm like, man, it shouldn't be the last period of the last day of the week before I get a chance to at least check in with somebody. It's not that big of a school.
Yeah. I mean, that's a pretty powerful realization, I think.
Yeah.
What feelings did you have associated with that when you said, I haven't seen you all week?
I just felt guilty, and I tried, they weren't like pointing that out. I think it's just kind of how I took it. I'm like, oh my goodness, that shouldn't be a conversation that I'm having with somebody on the way out the doors. Like, all right, hope you had a good week. Have a good weekend. Maybe I'll see you next week. Maybe not.
Maybe, who knows?
Yeah, it really did make me feel guilty. I'm like, I don't know that my focus is in the right spot if that's the interaction I'm having with the teacher in a small school. Yeah.
So let's shift the conversation just a little bit and talk about instructional leadership for a moment, because I think that this highlights an important distinction. From what sources can your teachers learn to be better teachers?
I'd say from their colleagues, from just themselves, those that are just, you know, internally driven to do it, will seek out ways through technology or other resources. Colleagues and probably administrators would be the top three.
Books, probably,
Mhm.
conferences, ed camps, like any kind, like blogs and TikTok videos, even. Like there are lots of ways to learn how to be a better teacher.
Yeah.
One of the problems with our profession is that because we say that we need to be the instructional leader, we make it seem like we are the only source of how teachers can improve, right? And that's what the term instructional leader connotes. And it's not that exactly, but that's the connotation, is that if you're the instructional leader, then you have all of the answers.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really not the case. And there's plenty of other opportunities for people to learn and grow and develop. So I think the important thing here to think about is that your teachers don't actually need you to tell them how to be better teachers. They probably have lots of examples of that already, and they may need some specific help in specific areas, but for the most part, they probably don't really need that. A brand new teacher who doesn't have connections and relationships with others may need that more than somebody who's been around for more than 3 years and has some idea of how to already improve their teaching. How do you react to that? What do you think about that idea?
I think you're right, but my first thought was, then why do we do so many teacher evaluations?
I know, right?
And it's also probably why good teachers kind of feel, I don't know if offended is the right word, but when they're an effective, experienced teacher who's seeking out resources and ways to get better, and then a principal comes in and was like, hey, do this. It's almost kind of like degrading in a way. Like,
Yeah.
well, I'm not sitting around waiting to get better until you tell me. Good teachers aren't waiting for an administrator to come in and fill out a rubric and
Yeah.
then say, "Oh, now I'll get better." No, good teachers are always getting better,
Yeah.
regardless of what they're getting from an administrator. But also, why are we doing teacher evaluations?
Yeah.
So it's
Um, so we're doing teacher evaluations because it is legislatively convenient for that to happen. That's really all there is to it. So there's no real reason for us to do that besides we just need somebody to say you're good enough. And part of the problem is that like 97% of all teachers get a satisfactory rating on their evaluation. And so it's not even that meaningful for us to do that in the first place, yet we still do it. So I would say if you there are many ways that you can support teachers besides being the quote unquote instructional leader. You can be the people leader and help them solve problems and get solutions that they need in the moment rather than trying to just tell them how to be better teachers. And I think most people who advocate for the principal being the instructional leader would not say that like you are the source of all information about good teaching. That's just how it feels. Like you said, a teacher doesn't suddenly realize, oh, I can do better because the principal came in and said, you got a 3 on this rubric and here's what you do to get a 4. That's like, boy, that is like the most boring work ever.
yeah.
Right. But helping someone see that they can get better by bringing something out of them that they didn't know was there, the only way to do that is to be a people leader and not an instructional leader.
I don't know the history of the term instructional leader, but sometimes I feel like it's something superintendents came up with to get principals out of their office. That old, like you think of the old school principals, like things are clean, things run on time, things are organized, discipline's dealt with, the kind of stuff that, you have to do as a principal because everybody will make sure you have to do it. But getting in classrooms and being involved in what we're really doing here, which is teaching and learning, was a shift for some people.
Yeah, I think so. So if you take that approach, now that you are a people leader, what needs to change about your day-to-day practices in order for you to be a people leader? We already talked about, instead of doing the morning lap, you're going to do break it up throughout the week into different days. What else needs to change?
Did you ever get the feeling as a principal there were some teachers that just didn't want to be the squeaky wheel and like didn't want to seek out help or feedback?
Oh, yes.
Not that they like have anything to hide or they're not as effective or anything like that, but I'm starting as since I'm new this year, it's taken me a while, but I'm starting to get a feeling for a few that just, they don't want to be a burden, or I don't want to bug anybody. I don't want to ask for help. You have any good ideas just to help them feel a little more connected? And like, you don't want to force them to like, hey, check in with me this many times a month or something. But I feel like they kind of cruise under the radar and go unnoticed, which isn't a good thing.
Yeah. Well, I think you're asking the exactly right question of how do I help those who are avoiding or resisting asking for help?
Yeah.
That is being a people leader, because that is recognizing who those people are and finding ways that you can provide support to them to help them in whatever it is that they need. And you may not even know what it is that they need, and you may never find out exactly what they need, but you can still help them by paying attention to them and being there and supporting.
Right.
So I think last time you talked about somebody who like didn't have enough chairs. Is that right?
Yep.
And so you're like, what? Let's get you some chairs. What are we doing here? Like, kids need to sit. It's not a big deal. So being present and noticing and knowing what's going on is a great way to do that. And I think that finding those who cruise under the radar and reaching out to them specifically is a great way to do that, and to reach out to them intentionally and answer their needs before they even have a chance to ask for them. So think about the teachers that you're working with, without saying their names because it doesn't matter, but what's a need that is unrecognized right now that you know about that you could do something about?
Well, I think with teachers that are new to the district, one need is like just resources, like materials and things that I would hope that everybody has and needs for class and students, but doesn't. That'd be one.
So what can you do to help that person get that thing today? Like what is in your capacity to make sure they have what they need today?
Well,
Not tomorrow or next week, but like literally today. What could you do today?
I guess just give them permission, if there isn't something in their teacher budget, find another way to buy it. I noticed doing walkthroughs the other day, there was a teacher who was making copies of a textbook, and then kids had like stapled textbook sections they were reading from. And I'm like, wait a minute, is that teacher having to make copies every time they want to read a section of the textbook because we don't have enough books? Like, I could fix that. Give me a link. Let's buy
Yeah.
it. We'll find the
Yeah.
money. So that's one that, I think maybe it's that old school mentality, like when you're a new teacher, keep your head down.
Yep. Don't smile till
Don't
Christmas.
don't smile till Christmas. Don't speak up
Yep.
in a staff meeting until you're tenured. All that silly old advice.
Yeah. I actually was talking with someone last week who said that when she said, your superintendent does not want to hear what you have to say, so keep your mouth shut in meetings with them. And I was like,
Oh,
man, that could be the truth, but how tragic that somebody would think that, and that's the way to do things. So yeah, I'm sure that there is information like that going out to teachers in your building that are saying, don't ask for anything, don't speak up, don't say anything, just like grin and bear it, and eventually, or just go buy it out of your own pocket when really it should be a school provided
yeah.
thing. Yeah, I think that like making sure they have the materials and resources is powerful. So how could you find out if someone needs those things today also? Because you may have an idea, but how do you go find out?
I guess I just got to ask them, right?
Yeah, I
I
mean
mean,
that's what
unless
I
it's
do.
as obvious as the one that I noticed, and I'm like, oh, even I can tell we're missing something here. But really, I guess that should probably just be a question. And I feel bad I didn't think to ask that before the start of the year, because that should be something that we're not waiting till, months into a school year before somebody checks in on or asks about.
Yeah. And likely these people who are flying under the radar are going to say, I don't need anything. I have everything I need. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So a question that I started our conversation with today, I think, because I said it in my mind if I didn't say it out loud, was what's on your mind? And asking that question opens it up for them to say anything. And they may not be very clear about it themselves, but they'll appreciate that you're asking. Another question is, what else? And another question is, what is your specific challenge? And another question is, how can I help? All of those questions are powerful in getting you to where you can actually provide support to someone. And those all come from a book called The Coaching Habit, which we read in the mastermind. I don't remember if you were in the mastermind when we read that or not.
I don't think so.
But I will put a link to my 1-page summary of that book in the show notes so people can have it, because it goes over those questions and helps you see how powerful they can be in everyday conversations. And it's how I try to run most of my meetings with people, is because I'm a server. I want to help people. And so that's what I try to do is ask that. And then I'll ask my favorite question that that I love from the mastermind, which is, what was most valuable to you today? And so for you today, Eric, what was most valuable from our conversation?
I was taking some notes, and I think my favorite note that I took was, I liked how you put it. You said focused on the individual, not just the data. It's not just about numbers and percentages, but it's about people and individuals. And now just trying to find some ways to make it happen. But I know it's a bit of a mind shift for me that I gotta make and make more of a priority.
Yeah. And I truly believe that if everybody was focusing on the individual, then the data would follow. And it's crazy to think that it wouldn't, because when people feel supported, loved, paid attention to, everything improves. That's called connection. That's how we heal trauma. That's how we help others become their best selves. We don't, like, you and I both have had people that we have admired who have never told us anything that we needed to do to be better, but have still made us want to be better and become better just because we knew they cared about us.
Right. Yeah, it helps build a sense of belonging too, which is important for staff and for students.
Yeah, I like it.
Can I brag about you before we get off?
Yeah, we might as well.
I almost threw this out there as my answer for most valuable part of today, but you probably wouldn't have accepted it because it wasn't anything you did today. But we had our principals conference last week, and I got to hear Todd Whitaker, who I love, one of my favorite educators and authors of all time. He's awesome. But he was talking about and teaching the principals some different ways to approach interviews and hiring and calling references. And I got to brag to some of the principals I was working with about, I think it was your last chapter in How to Be a Transformative Principal, where you talked about calling the applicants before the interview and telling them, this is the kind of school we are, and this is what we're about. And if you're not up for that, that's okay. Pull your name out now. And they loved it. And then they were asking me like, whoa, what book is that? But it was something innovative to them, but I know you've been doing, and really helps you recruit quality teachers and get the right people in the school that want to be a part of what you're doing.
Yeah, that's good. I appreciate that. Thanks for sharing, and thanks for sharing that with them also. I actually was at a conference in Orlando with Rick Wormley, and Rick and Todd, I interviewed on Transformative Principal. And it's funny you bring up Todd because Rick said, "Have you talked to Todd Wood recently?" And I was like, "No, I haven't." And he's like, "Oh, well, I'll tell him that I saw you and that you said hello and all that kind of stuff." And I was like, "Okay, cool." Yeah, I
You're
certainly don't
it,
see.
man. If you're hanging
Yeah,
out with Rick Wormley and Todd Whitaker.
yeah. Well, what, and that goes back to this idea that we've been talking about. Rick made me feel like I should be talking to Todd on a regular basis, and he should be a friend that I talk to. And he didn't make me feel like I was less than or some random guy. He made me feel like I was actually valuable. And it was a good example of being a people leader that we've been talking about this whole time, that I felt respected, I felt appreciated, and I felt like I mattered to him. And that, there's a good example there.
Well, I was sitting next to another principal, and as Todd was wrapping up, I said, "Hey, I know this makes me a nerd, but as soon as he's done, will you come up and take a picture of me with him?"
Yeah.
Well, before I could get up there, I was sitting in the very back. I bet there were 40, maybe 40 other principals that beat me to it, which
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, I'm not the only nerd here.
That's right.
But the line was so long, I felt bad he was going to miss his flight. So I ended up talking to him and getting a picture on his way out of the hotel. I went and
Okay.
outside.
Yeah. Well, there you go. Well, good. Very good. He is an awesome guy, and I'm glad that you got to experience that. Thanks for this conversation today. As always, this is a ton of fun, and I'm loving the fact that you're doing interviews for the show, and I encourage people to listen to those as well because there's a wealth of knowledge there also. So thank you for being part of this.
Yeah. Thank you, Jethro. Thanks for your help again today.